This was supposed to be the week when Trump was supposed to deliver on his big ultimatum for Vladimir Putin. End the war in Ukraine or else face new crippling economic sanctions. That was the ultimatum. What Trump did instead, though, is bow completely to Putin. Today, Trump announced that he would be meeting with the Russian president face-to-face next Friday in Alaska on U.S. soil, an added bonus for the Russians. But wait, there's more. Earlier today, when asked whether Ukraine, who was invaded by Russia 3.5 years ago and has been defending itself ever since, would have to give up its territory, Trump gave this little clue about what a peace deal could entail.
We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both.
The betterment of both. Quite a turn of phrase. This is Ukraine's territory. I'm not sure what he means, the betterment of both. Now, make no mistake, that was the president of the United States capitulating to Russia in advance of a meeting with Putin. So today was kind of a big win for Russia, which is why one could imagine that in the Kremlin tonight, it's vodka shots all around, perhaps. Joining me now is former U.S. ambassador to Russia under President Obama, Michael McFaul, who I should add speaks regularly with Ukraine's President Zelensky and knows a whole lot about these issues, as you all know. Ambassador McFaul, I mean, I just gave my short take on this meeting, but what do you think?
Jen, that was a pretty good take. That's exactly what I think. This is an extraordinary gift to Putin, just like you said. As you remember, when we worked together at the White House, anytime a foreign leader meets with the president of the United States, that's a gift. That it is Vladimir Putin that can't travel to a lot of countries because he's a criminal, and that he gets to come to the United States of America and stand next to the president of the United States is a gift. He's already received everything he needs. The question, therefore, for President Trump and his team, what are we getting in return for America's national interests, for Europe's interests, and for Ukraine's interests? And so far, the details on that are very murky. The clip you just played about swaps, you're absolutely right. He's talking about swapping Ukrainian land for Ukrainian land. He's not talking about Russian land being swapped. And I can tell you the reaction in Ukraine among officials, this feels very nervous. They're very nervous about this, especially because President Zelensky is not going to be in Alaska. It's just going to be Putin and Trump.
I mean, I think that is for Trump being played, that is part of it. But what happens next week at this meeting and where does it go, to your point? I mean, Putin told the Trump administration this week that Russia would agree to a ceasefire of Ukraine if Ukraine handed over eastern Ukraine, which would be an absurd thing for them to do. But is that kind of a fear? Is that something that you think is possible in this meeting, that Trump could potentially agree to that?
Well, first, I'm glad you pointed out what Putin's talking point is, because it's been the same since he started this war, this barbaric invasion of the sovereign democratic country of Ukraine. He says, give us the territories that we already put on our map as being part of Russia, right? You buy a map in Russia today, those 4 regions are already part of the Russian Federation, but Russian soldiers don't occupy those 4 regions. So he has this audacious talking point that the Ukrainians need to liberate their own country, and then we can have peace. I hope the president has enough good sense to reject that. And I hope there may be some small steps, maybe some kind of temporary ceasefire, that at least there would be something tangible out of this meeting, because otherwise it's a gift for Putin, and we, the American people, and the Ukrainian people get nothing in return.
Let's talk about the Ukrainians, which are obviously a hugely important factor here. They are the factor, and you speak with them regularly. Zelensky seems to be in a very tough spot here. You can tell me. I mean, he has the president of the United States having this meeting with the Russians. He's barred, as I understand it, in his constitution from ceding any territory in Ukraine. Not that I'm suggesting he should. What is kind of his best outcome of this meeting next Friday?
Well, that the extreme positions that Putin has laid out are not, Trump doesn't come out and say, oh, I think these are great ideas. And I worry about that because, I've been in meetings with President Putin. He's extremely well versed in all these issues. This is, his main issue of his presidency right now. President Trump is not. So I hope that there'll be staff. I hope they won't do much one-on-one time. They did that in Helsinki. We know in 2018 that did not end well for American national interests. But Zelensky is jammed because his people are tired. They don't want this war to go on. They don't want to give up territory. And he knows that eventually there'll probably have to be some kind of agreements, you can imagine something along these lines. They'll never recognize these territories as being part of Russia, but they might agree to pursue unification only through peaceful means. And that could be a kind of trade space. But I want to be clear, lots of Ukrainians won't agree with that, and lots of Ukrainian soldiers won't agree with that. So if President Trump thinks he can just do a deal with Putin and then send an email or put it out on Truth Social, this is what Zelensky needs to accept, he can't do that. It is a democratic country in Ukraine. That would be political suicide for President Zelensky.
But before I let you go, I mean, you mentioned some of this. There's a whole body language and tradecraft to these meetings, especially with Putin. What are you going to be watching for? You mentioned if they are meeting one-on-one, if that's a lengthy one-on-one. What are the other things that will be flags for you, I guess, as we look at this, watch this meeting next Friday?
Well, the first flag is this is the exact opposite of how usual presidential summits with leaders from Moscow are organized. Usually we get the agreements all done at lower levels, people like my level when I worked at the White House, and the end game is the summit. President Trump's turning that around, so that already makes me nervous. Second, I do not want any one-on-one time. He needs to be there with the Secretary of State, also the National Security Advisor, because he just does not know all the facts. And the worst thing that would happen is that Putin says, oh, this is what we should do. Just give us Donbass and Crimea, Mr. President. We already have them. And he'll say, oh, that's a good idea. And then they go in front of the press and he says that and locks in, because when the president of the United States says something, it's very hard to unravel that. That becomes policy. That's what I'm most nervous about in this meeting hastily scheduled for Alaska on Friday.
Ambassador Mike McFaul, I know we were able to snag you and you had other plans this evening, and I'm so grateful for that because I think everybody's trying to make sense of what this is, and this was incredibly helpful. Thank you so much again for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me.
We begin with the Trump White House getting skewered on the Epstein scandal. Today, a new filing from Trump's beleaguered DOJ that is already giving rise to suspicion and criticism. Plus, new legal action from a leading watchdog group and yet another warning from a Trump ally about the political peril of the current scandal. As New Republic reports today on Epstein, even MAGA world can smell that Trump is hiding something. In a new filing this afternoon, the Department of Justice pushing forward on requests to unseal grand jury material. But legal observers say it looks like theater and a barely concealed attempt to appear interested in transparency while pursuing information most experts believe won't contain any new revelations. New details today on Trump's desperate attempt to quell political blowback. The White House reportedly, quote, asking podcaster Joe Rogan to help ease the uproar over the Epstein files. Look, Rogan has been a vocal critic of the administration's handling of the Epstein files. The other problem for Trump concerns Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. Trump has dangled a pardon for her, which critics say looks like a blatant attempt to elicit friendly testimony from her. Today, Trump's former press secretary, Sean Spicer, warns all of this could backfire spectacularly.
What do you think the reaction would be if Donald Trump pardoned Maxwell?
I actually think about this differently. I would say he would be under the impression that he was going to be able to say that they got something from her, further information. I think if anyone who sells him on this is lying to him. My point, and that's why you're like, what is his reaction going to be? I think this is very akin to Comey, right? When he fired Comey, he was told, oh, if you fire Comey, everyone's going to cheer you on. And he missed I think people misled him on how that was going to go down. I think this is similar. There will be outrage like never before if she gets a deal.
Also, the government transparency group Democracy Forward filing a new lawsuit to force the administration to release the Epstein files. The head of the group saying, quote, President Trump has repeatedly said he would release the Epstein files. His spokesperson claims his administration is the most transparent in history, and yet they continue to hide from the American people. The only thing transparent about the Trump-Vance administration is how clearly they continue to disregard our nation's laws. Joining me now to discuss is Ambassador Norm Eisen, Executive Chair of the Democracy Defenders Fund, co-founder of the Contrarian, and former Obama ethics czar. His group is suing the administration for Epstein information. Also with us is Tara Setmeyer, co-founder and CEO of the Seneca Project, author of Uncompromised on Substack, and former GOP communications director. So, Norm, I'll start with you. What are you hoping to get out of suing the DOJ and this administration for the Epstein files? Are you hoping to sort of highlight how non-transparent they are, highlight how they're obstructing justice, highlight how they are probably hiding something or somebody? Or do you actually think that they will release the information in any shape, where, form that we can actually understand or see as the public?
Jason, we filed the very first of what are now 11 FOIA requests against the administration. And there have been a series of steps since, with some proceeding in court. So far, what we've seen are litigation over demands for faster treatment. First out of the box, we expect that we will file the very first action demanding the file themselves. And why is that so important? Donald Trump appears in these files. They haven't produced the Trump Epstein information, and instead they've taken a convicted felon, serious sex offenses involving minors, Ghislaine Maxwell. She was interviewed by Donald Trump's personal former criminal counsel, Todd Blanche, and then she's moved to a minimum security facility. It stinks of a cover-up, Jason. And so what we're trying to get at is what happened, including Trump Epstein files, including Ghislaine Maxwell, and who was involved in the administration. The American people deserve to know. And frankly, victims are outraged about this movement of Maxwell. They need to know as well.
So, Tara, I want to go to the comms part about this first. So we have reports now that the White House is trying to beg Joe Rogan to go out and play defense for them on this particular issue. And I tend to be skeptical of that. I mean, first and foremost, I think it's ridiculous that the White House, with all of their apparatus and equipment, are going to a podcaster. But second, I don't think it's very likely that you're going to be able to convince any members of the Magasphere or the Manosphere or anybody else who cares about this to change their mind. I mean, do you think that's likely? Do you think that the administration could put pressure on people who have staked their reputations on the importance of these files to somehow flip the script in order to make Trump and Vance happy?
Well, I think you've lost the plot when you have to go to Joe Rogan's podcast to explain the White House's position on the Epstein files and why they've given preferential treatment to a convicted child sex predator. They're in a bad way. And frankly, they violated every rule of crisis communications from day one about how to handle this situation. They've mishandled it for weeks, which is why we're still here. Right. The simple solution here is to release the damn files. If you have nothing to hide, you release the files. They were awfully gung-ho about this until they actually saw what was in the files, I'm assuming, very early on in the administration. They campaigned, many of them campaigned on it. Many in the podcaster, right-wing podcaster, grifter world made their millions and fortunes on pushing conspiracy theories around this and other things. Some of them got cushy positions in the administration, like the FBI director and deputy FBI director. So this is a huge problem for them in a number of areas, and they can't expect people who have been focused on this for years to all of a sudden just believe the BS that they're feeding them. That's the problem. And Joe Rogan, I mean, to his credit, was skeptical of this and why they've mishandled this and said, like, this isn't making sense. What's the problem here? I don't think sending Donald Trump's former personal attorney, now DOJ official, who interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell and gave her some, sweetheart immunity and moved her to a cushy Club Fed, is going to convince the Joe Rogans of the world that now all of a sudden everything's kosher. This is a failed strategy because they're full of crap. They're BSing people, and the MAGAs are understanding that. And you have now the victims and the survivors who are coming out speaking more about their stories, which is another PR nightmare for the White House, because now they have agency and they're telling their horrific stories of what they went through. And it doesn't look good for the White House when they still are concealing the files. For what?
Norm, so since you're, again, in the process of trying to sort of get these files public, this is the question that I had. This is a regular man or woman on the street question. So the files come out, and we get a chance to read them. Even if the files detail terrible behavior on the part of anybody in the administration, whether it's the president or anybody else connected one way or another, what happens next? I mean, because I think the concern that a lot of people have, and the reason that you might get some shoulder shrugs from people who aren't heavily invested, is even if this information comes forward, unless there is the immediate threat of prosecution for what we find out in these Epstein files, it seems like a tempest in a teapot. So what do you say to people who have that concern? Even if this comes out, if nobody's held accountable, what difference does it make?
Well, it depends on what we see in those files. For example, if there is evidence, we demanded all the information about the decision to transfer Ghislaine Maxwell. If there's evidence that the administration is engaging in a cover-up at the expense of these victims, my goodness, that is explosive information. So there's much more to it. The country, frankly, has a right to know about Trump and Epstein as well, and all of the other details, Jason.
Tara, I want to play you some sound from a town hall in Nebraska. Representative Flood faces serious boos over Epstein. I want to get your response on the other side.
Why are you covering up the Epstein files?
So, Tara, my question is simply this. If people are this upset, that's fine. It is August of 2025. Do you think this actually has any impact by next year? Because that's the other thing. As angry as some Republican and MAGA voters say they are, if their votes don't change next year, does this matter?
Well, I think that's the question here, is how long can the outrage on this go for? And I think the White House is counting on running out the clock on this. However, if the strategy to keep this, first of all, if they keep making mistakes like this, the White House, in prolonging the story, it's just going to elongate this. I mean, what Norm is doing and what his organization is doing, there will be others. The survivors are coming out now and starting to kind of go back to what are their options? Are they going to sue for things? They keep telling their story. So it could extend the life of this for several months. And I think also what it does is it gives Democrats an opportunity. And even my organization, the Seneca Project, we're a content organization. So we put out ads, we put out content to inform people of what's going on, to hold Trump accountable, and to explain to people what's at stake. And this is just another part of the pattern of how Donald Trump is a liar. He's betraying people, including his own people. And we have an ad out now called Cheater that's going to play right in Bedminster this weekend, talking about how Donald Trump has cheated in every aspect of his life, including cheating the American people on this and on the bill, on the budget bill, et cetera. So there's ways to weave this in to the overarching theme of what Donald Trump's presidency has represented, how it hurts the American people. And Democrats have an opportunity going into the midterms to consistently talk about that. And then that can depress the MAGA vote. Even Steve Bannon said, if 1-2% of the MAGAs, even 5, stay home, they're in big trouble for the midterms, which is why Donald Trump and the MAGAs are trying to cheat the American people and voters by changing the districts in places like Texas and others. They know they're in trouble with this.
Just into NBC News, the Justice Department is currently investigating the New York Attorney General's office. The focus is the successful $300 million civil fraud case against Donald Trump and his businesses, as well as the case New York AG Letitia James brought against the NRA. Now, James emerged as one of Trump's most outspoken political rivals after he left office in 2021. So let's get more on all this from NBC's David Rohde, and back with us, former New York Assistant Attorney General Adam Pollack. David, refresh our memory of these cases specifically. Explain what the DOJ is looking at here.
So I just want to shout out first our colleagues, Tom Winter and Ryan Riley and John Dietz, who broke the story for us, and I work closely with them. So this is a long-running legal battle that very much frustrated President Trump. The New York Attorney General, Letitia James, basically accused him of inflating or decreasing the value of his assets to cheat on his taxes, to make more money on certain kind of businesses. And that case was successful. A civil court judge in New York City ordered Trump to pay a fine of $300 million roughly. And that deeply frustrated President Trump. There was a separate case that has been brought up about the NRA. That was Letitia James suing the NRA, saying that it had violated New York state law by making, misleading statements about its practices. That lawsuit was less successful for James. The fact that the federal attorney based in Albany, New York, is now investigating Letitia James herself is fits a pattern of the recent cases that have come out. Pam Bondi has just also, we don't know where it is, but has a separate grand jury looking into the claims of President Obama engaging in a treasonous conspiracy against Trump that relates to Tulsi Gabbard's statements as the intelligence director. So multiple cases, but clearly the Trump administration fighting back legally with the Justice Department as its tool against its enemies.
Adam, let's just take this by itself. Is it unusual for the DOJ to open an investigation into a state case, or a couple of them that have already been litigated and resulted in jury verdicts?
This is unbelievably unusual. This is effectively unprecedented, and it's telling that this investigation about two cases that happened here in Manhattan is not being handled by the SDNY, the premier office for federal investigation. It's being handled in Albany, where there's a prosecutor chosen as the appointed interim U.S. attorney who hasn't gotten Senate consent. In fact, after his 120 days as interim U.S. attorney, the judges there in Albany rejected him, prohibited him from staying on, and yet he's still there. He has no prosecutorial experience, and yet he's driving this unbelievably politicized investigation.
David, do we know what potential allegations there are here, and what are the potential outcomes?
So the investigation, and I want help on this, please, is for denial of rights, I believe, is the charge. This is something that's been floated by legal conservatives who back Trump as a case that could be brought against people who essentially improperly, that Letitia James denied Donald Trump his civil rights, as I understand it, by bringing this civil suit that she won and getting the $300 million damage. And this has been brought up as a charge that can be used in other cases against prosecutors who brought cases against Trump. But this is the first time, at least I know of, where it's been brought. There's an actual investigation looking at that specific charge.
What do you make of that, Adam?
Look, there could be legitimate situations where the government seeks to prosecute law enforcement for a true denial of civil rights, for a truly improper investigation. But these are not improper investigations. To the contrary, here you have judges both in the state AG's civil fraud case against Trump and the case against the NRA. You have judges that repeatedly affirm the validity of these civil cases, judges resulting in verdicts of liability. There's clearly a check on the system that is in place and has found these to be valid cases. They can go up on appeal, the Trump case, the Trump civil liability case that resulted in the $300 million plus verdict, plus interest, a total of $450 million. It's up on appeal, and the appellate court is taking it very seriously. That is the way you look at whether liability is proper. A criminal investigation by the NDNY, the Northern District of New York, is unprecedented and improper political retribution.
So this looks like weaponization of the Justice Department to you.
It looks like complete weaponization, and you have to ask, would DA Alvin Bragg be next on the block?
We shall see. Thank you very much for your analysis, Adam Pollack. David Rohde, thank you for bringing us the reporting.
The number of Americans now receiving unemployment benefits is now at its highest level since the COVID-19 pandemic. Labor Department data shows just shy of 2 million people getting those jobless checks. But President Trump is still denying that last week's bad jobs numbers were accurate. So to bolster his point, he brought an economist from the Conservative Heritage Foundation into the Oval Office with lots of charts to talk numbers. What the Washington Post calls an 8-minute pep rally on Trump's economy versus that of his predecessor, Joe Biden. But it is important to note that those charts are based on unpublished, unverified data. Joining us now, chief strategist for the Bush-Cheney 2004 presidential campaign and senior MSNBC political analyst Matthew Dowd, and Axios' senior markets reporter Madison Mills is here. So what is, Madison, the state of the jobs market right now? Are there cracks in the labor market?
We're absolutely starting to see cracks in the labor market, and it's really a low hire, low fire environment. All of these companies dealing with these tariff updates that keep coming in, keep changing, and that's a lot of uncertainty, right? Plus, they're coming off the back of the pandemic when there was that severe labor shortage, so they don't want to be too quick to have a lot of layoffs, but they're not necessarily hiring people either. They want to kind of keep their capital expenditures as low as they possibly can at the moment, and a little bit more of a wait-and-see environment as they wait to see what these tariffs look like, as they wait to see what the economy starts to look like. So if you have a job right now, you're probably feeling okay about the labor market, but if you don't, it's a very difficult time.
And what Donald Trump wants you to believe is that all those economists, the majority of economists aren't right, but this guy is. Who is the guy that he brought in there? And can those numbers even be fact-checked?
Well, as you very smartly mentioned in your intro, it's Census Bureau data that we do not have access to, so it would be impossible to verify the data without having the opportunity to look at it. What I can tell you is that the sources who I speak with, economists on both sides of the aisle, say it's incredibly critical to have an independent, nonpartisan Bureau of Labor Statistics, because the jobs data every month, that's the thing that we are all watching all the time. It moves markets across the globe, not just here in the United States. It's a key picture of the health of our economy. So having that ability to verify that data independently it's hard to overstate how critical that is.
Yeah, and what we can say is that the Labor Department data, i.e., this is how many checks we sent out, unemployment checks, is the number, right? So, Matthew, independent economic analysts may look at this and say, this isn't rooted in reality. This is Donald Trump. But does he rely on his reputation? I mean, look, a lot of people voted for this successful billionaire businessman. So maybe he figures they'll believe him over the experts when it comes to the economy.
Well, yeah, that's what Donald Trump wants you to believe. He wants to say, are you going to believe me or your lying eyes and ears that see all the data? And how you feel, actually, as Madison knows, when you look at how people feel about the economy today, they're negative on the economy. They're negative on inflation. They're negative. They have negative confidence in that the economy is growing in this. And so it's not only a data problem that Donald Trump had, it's the majority of the American public and how they feel about their own finances and the economy in general in this. And that's the problem that Donald Trump has. His base will likely stay with him. They seem to believe, whatever he says, whatever it is about. I think they're sort of fact insensitive in this. And so that won't matter to them. But the people that decided the election in 2024 based their primary reason why they decided the election was they were upset about the economy, upset about inflation. Those people today who swung to Donald Trump are more upset today about the economy and the inflation. And so Donald Trump can hold up as many charts as he wants, but when you're speaking past people's feelings, how they feel about the economy, you're in a big problem.
You've taught me a new diplomatic phrase, fact insensitive. But let me ask you about just strategy, right? Because there are lots of things that this administration has wanted or said it wanted to put in the rear view. Donald Trump wanted Epstein in the rear view, but he kept talking about it. You would think that if you have bad jobs numbers that are then bolstered by what we saw from the Labor Department about unemployment checks going out, that would be something you would want to put in the rear view mirror. But they keep he keeps talking about it. Can you think of a political strategic reason to keep bad news stories alive? And also, by the way, to keep comparing himself to Joe Biden?
Well, I mean, that's the problem generally among the voters is you don't want to do that, especially among these swing voters who will decide the 2026 midterm elections in this, who are already disapprove of Donald Trump generally and disapprove him on all the big issues, on the economy, on inflation, on Epstein, on immigration. They disapprove of him on all those issues. Donald Trump, this is not abnormal to Donald Trump. Donald Trump seems to have his own reality bubble that he thinks no matter what he says, it will become true by virtue of him saying it. He's got some semblance of evidence among his base that continues to be true. There are slight cracks in it because of Epstein, and I'm interested going forward is those cracks that the Epstein problem and not being transparent and not releasing files and all of that. Will that crack people to start looking more objectively at other data like the economy in this? For his base, Donald Trump seems to be able to say and do anything, and those voters believe it. But 65% of the country is not his base, and that's the problem.
Yeah, and there does seem to be, I think, one successful strategy that we're witnessing, whether you're Tim Cook of Apple giving Trump some glass and gold that looks like an award, or economist Stephen Moore coming up with numbers to fit Trump's narrative. It earns you a trip to the Oval Office. It earns you the president's praise. So I guess it helps them. It certainly helped Tim Cook, right? Tim Cook looks like he's okay with tariffs right now. But big picture, does any of this help the Republican Party, which knows it has a challenging set of midterms coming up?
No, it doesn't help him at all. I mean, I think that the problem of what's Donald Trump's presidency so far in this second term of his presidency is almost every step along the way has changed the minds of independent swing voters against him. That's one huge problem. And it's begun to demotivate Republicans on the other side. And so when you have those two parts entering a campaign where you've moved swing voters against you, which Donald Trump has done and his policies have done for the last 6 months, and you're demotivating parts of your base, that is a perfect storm of a problem in a midterm, which is why in your lead in the segment leading in about why something is happening in Texas on redistricting, which I know we'll talk about, which is why they're doing that, because they know the broad environment and Donald Trump's numbers in general are really bad. So they're trying to jerry-rig the system in a way that they can try to overcome that. They know, Republicans know deep in their hearts, the situation they have today is really bad for the midterm.
The fact-sensitive Madison Mills, thank you. Come back. It's great having you here on set. Matthew, stay close.
We turn now to Texas, and Democrats who left that state to stop a Republican redistricting effort will hold a press conference later today in the state of California. California Governor Gavin Newsom has announced that he and other state lawmakers will be the second state to host the Democrats who are breaking that quorum in Texas. Newsom is taking an active role in the fight, saying he would push for his reliably blue state to redistrict if Texas succeeds in switching 5 Democratic seats to Republican. Let's now bring in Democratic Senator Alex Padilla of California. He is a member of the Budget Committee, also ranking member of both the Rules Committee and the Judiciary Immigration Subcommittee. Also joining us for the conversation, NBC News national affairs analyst and a partner and chief political columnist at Puck, John Heilman, and co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader. Our thanks to all of you for being with us, Senator, in particular you. So let's start with the situation there in Texas, this battle over redistricting. You know, these lawmakers are in your home state now, in California. Your governor has said that, look, if you redraw Texas, we'll do the same here. We'll dramatically increase potentially the number of Democratic seats. Talk to us about just how precarious political moment this seems to be for everybody.
Right. No, and I guess precarious is a very good word. So let's actually put this into a bigger context, because it's not just about redistricting. And, ideal scenario, Texas just stands down, and this doesn't go beyond that. how bad must it be? How bad must Trump and Republicans in Congress feel about their chances next November, right? You usually run on a legislative record of accomplishment, but their accomplishments have been what? Giving tax breaks to billionaires, cutting health care, trying to destroy federal government as we know it, that their only chance of holding on to power in the midterms is to rig the election. The redistricting is just one piece. If you look at Trump's executive orders, if you look at legislation that Republicans have tried to push through Congress to make it harder for people to register to vote, to stay on the rolls, to cast their ballot. And then you couple that with what the Department of Justice is doing, trying to demand personal information of all voters in states across the country as a pretext for their voter purging. I mean, it's a perfect storm of rigging next November's election. So it's not just a redistricting fight in isolation. It's part of this desperate, hold on power.
So, Senator, in this last week or so, since the story in Texas really moved to the forefront, I've talked to a lot of Democrats, and they seem to be of two minds here. Many of them are sort of have really prided themselves as being the party that plays by the rules, that's saying, look, this is how the system should work. That to your point, if Texas were to stand down, none of this would happen. We should move back to where things were. And are queasy about changing the game, say in California and other blue states. But there are others who say, look, Republicans have changed the rules, in their words, cheated long enough. It's time to fight fire with fire. Where do you come down on this? What do your constituents say?
Look, I'm in the fight fire with fire camp. Again, ideal scenario, Texas stands down. But look at the stakes are just so high with what this administration is trying to do beyond the limits of their power. And there's no longer a check and balance, right? Congress is a co-equal branch of government. The Republican majority in both the House and the Senate is negligent in their responsibility of providing the oversight and accountability to this administration. That's why the administration has lost so many court cases, and either they're appealing or disregarding those rulings. And so unless or until Republicans in Congress stand up, we have to do everything we can. I mean, we're in the minority right now, using every legislative and procedural lever we can. God bless the Democrats in the Texas legislature for going through those extreme steps of breaking quorum to keep the redistricting effort from happening. But in communities across the country, we know there's organizing happening and preparations for the midterm election. So everybody's trying to do their part.
So, Lauren, it's hard to see if there really was a widespread redistricting war. It's hard to see that being good for democracy inherently. But that's not what this is. Donald Trump's not thinking that. President Trump is thinking, I need to keep the control of the House so I don't get impeached again.
Well, right. And because he can't accomplish anything if he doesn't keep the majority. And it was so incredibly close. And in fact, California, as we talk about potential redistricting in California had some of the closest seats in the country in the last two cycles. Senator, when you look at polling over the last number of years that have asked Americans what they think of redistricting, most Americans sort of have a pretty vague idea of what it means. They don't really know it. I mean, I'm always amazed at how many of my very well-informed friends don't know what gerrymandering is, really. So given how much else Democrats have to talk about to the American people, as you say, sort of prosecuting the failures of the the big beautiful bill, how do you talk about redistricting in a way that Americans are even going to understand? I mean, it's hard to feel like it's the most important thing right now, given how much else is at stake. But certainly many Democrats seem to feel it is, and it could be.
Right. And it's usually not on anybody's mind, but for once every 10 years, right? We go through this exercise after the census using reliable data. But I do think people know, hey, the political stakes are high enough, and Republicans are trying to rig the system. They're trying to rig the rules by which next November's elections are going to play out. That is visceral because they see what Republicans are doing, cutting access to health care. They see what Republicans are doing with, the Trump administration specifically on this unconstitutional, indiscriminate immigration raids that we see, especially in California. And all for what? Just tax breaks for billionaires? Their agenda is so unpopular. They know it. The American public knows it, and that's why the fight is on for next November.
John Hammond, it does seem this very quickly has become a storyline with significant stakes.
Yeah, huge stakes, John, and I think you can see it has stakes that go from the questions of the representation in the United States Congress all the way up to presidential politics. It's not hard to see Governor Abbott and Governor Newsom both as guys who are fighting or laying down markers for presidential runs down the line. Senator Padilla, I got two questions for you. One's real practical. And one's a little bit more. About principle. The practical one is there's been a lot of discussion in the last couple of days about the possibility of the FBI being deployed to try to bring these Texas lawmakers home. Governor Pritzker in Illinois said the FBI has no authority, and we are not going to turn over these Texas lawmakers. That's not going to happen in our state. Is that the posture you think that California should also adopt? That the FBI doesn't have any authority, and that California will protect these legislators if the FBI does come for them?
Well, look, FBI, really? I mean, it's just the latest example of Donald Trump weaponizing the federal government, not just the Department of Justice, but the FBI specifically to pursue his political agenda. To justify the FBI, what's been the federal crime? Has anybody said that a federal crime has been committed by anyone, let alone all of these Texas legislators? They're going to bat for their constituents is what they're doing. Donald Trump doesn't like that. And as we have seen, he'll do anything to try to quench dissent or anybody who disagrees with him or his agenda.
So a senior FBI official who briefly served as acting director at the start of President Trump's current term has been fired with no explanation. That's according to two federal law enforcement sources. That official, Brian Driscoll, has made headlines when he resisted a Justice Department directive to turn over a list of agents who had worked on January 6th cases. The request for those names came from then Deputy Attorney General Emil Bovee, who wrote in a memo that the list would be reviewed for any firing or, quote, personnel actions. Driscoll's resistance has made him a hero within the rank-and-file members of the FBI, where there were fears that the list would be used to purge the FBI of agents who worked on January 6 cases. Driscoll had been with the agency for almost 20 years. His firing was disclosed in an email to his colleagues, which was read to NBC News. The FBI declined to comment. So, Senator, your thoughts on how things are playing out here?
Yeah, look, not shocked. We've seen it coming, and this isn't the first instance of this disregard for justice and the independence, historic independence of the Department of Justice. I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee, and we've had a ton of confirmation hearings through the first half of this calendar year. New administration's coming in. Who should be the Attorney General? Who should be the Deputy Attorney General? Who should be the FBI Director? And now Emil Bovee and other Trump nominees for judicial positions, district courts, appellate courts. Their refusal to these nominees to answer direct questions from Democrats, they danced around even something as simple as, will you uphold the rule of law? What would you do if Donald Trump asked you to do something illegal or unconstitutional? We know this was coming when Republicans in the Senate are just rubber stamping all these nominees. So it's sadly not a surprise. The American public needs to take note and keep this in mind when we go to the ballot next November.
So is that where the recourse is, at the ballot? And what is it that you and your colleagues can do to amplify this and make sure people fully understand what you see as playing out here? What else can you do?
Yeah, look, it's an all of the above approach. Again, in the Senate, leveraging what we can to try to slow things down. I mean, when the Republican majority in the Judiciary Committee was refusing to even debate or discuss issues about the Epstein files, for example, or to let whistleblowers come testify before voting on nominees. At one point, Democrats walked out of the committee to break quorum just to help highlight Republicans turning a blind eye to all these dangers, all these red flags. So there's the inside baseball in Congress. We're working with partners around the country, not just attorneys general, but other organizations to bring forth lawsuits when appropriate. So I got to imagine, unjustified firings within the Department of Justice, people have their rights to defend from their employment, and that'll rear its head. And yes, calling attention to it by every means, organizing communities around the country, because the November midterms are going to be here before we know it.
Democratic Senator Alex Padilla of California, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning.